Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today in the show we have Kenneth Schwach. He is a physician assistant. He wrote the Kevin MD article, A Milligram of Understanding for Anti-Vaxxers. Kenneth, welcome to the show.
Thank you much.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
I'd be glad to. Really, it's kind of one of happenstance and serendipity, as I would say. If you were to travel back in time to 18-year-old me and tell him what I'd be doing today, he would shake his head and say you're crazy. There's no way I'm doing that. Basically, it kind of happened. I didn't even plan on going, or I don't even think my family planned on me going to college. But I went to college, and just kind of gradually over time, I started doing EMS while I was in college. I flipped over into a pre-nursing degree. Then I started working in the ER as an ER technician, and I saw the doctors there, and I thought, I could do what they're doing. Flipped over into a pre-med curriculum. At the time, they told me about what PA school was. And at that time, in the early 90s, there weren't many PAs in New Jersey. So it was, from my standpoint, it was still kind of a very new thing. After graduating with my undergrad, I did pharmaceutical research for a few years. And then when I knew I was ready, I wanted to go back. I wanted to, go back into patient care again. PA school was just the better fit for me. And since graduating, I've been mostly in emergency medicine. I've done a little bit of in other areas, a little primary care, a little internal medicine, a little critical care and pulmonary, but it's mainly been emergency medicine. I got out of the hospital briefly for the past 3 years. I did a little urgent care, but as of recent, I actually just returned to emergency medicine in a travel capacity.
So you said that when you first started going to PA school, there weren't that many, and that was, some time ago. Comment on the evolution of the physician assistant, and what's the status of the physician assistant now in 2022?
It's far more widespread. And just to clarify, when I first heard about the PA profession, there weren't that many. By the time I got into the school, it was definitely much more prominent in my area. And I've just seen it grow over the years to the point where I believe, I want to say Forbes or one of the magazines where they do like the top 10 growing fields or in the United States, like a physician assistant is way up there. Mm-hmm. It's amazing to me over the past 25 years how much it's grown.
So walk us through a typical day of some of the things that you see currently in your travel capacity in emergency.
And, in the years I'm at right now, and with the weather we've been having, it's been a lot of falls from trauma. So a lot of dislocated shoulders, a lot of fracture dislocations that need to be reduced. That's what I've seen a lot of in the past month. And of course, COVID is still there as well. I mean, that's still making up a lot of things that we're seeing as well.
All right. So let's talk about the Kevin MD article that you wrote. It was written back in December. It's titled A Milligram of Understanding for Anti-Vaxxers. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Yeah, I mean, the basic premise is, I think, if I were to try to summarize it, would be that I think that as providers, I think, and I'm sure there's going to be some that kind of raise their eyebrow when I make this statement, that I don't think we can do enough to try and connect with the people who are against vaccines or even on the cusp of getting the vaccine for COVID. And part of that came from listening to a lot of other podcasts, not yours per se, but listening to a lot of other podcasts that are either medical or scientific in nature. I noticed that there was a lot of people, a lot of providers, a lot of people who claim to be scientific minded, really carry themselves in a very superior way to the point where they would literally at times call people stupid. And you're never going to make progress if that's how you're addressing people, even if you're not addressing people to their face, even if you're talking about them when they're not there. I don't think you're ever going to make a connection. We're ever going to make a progress in getting more people to see what the evidence really shows regarding vaccines if we're carrying this air of superiority, if we're using any type of put down.
So give us a sense of people who are hesitant to receive the vaccines in your travels in the emergency department or urgent care or primary care. So when you see someone who's hesitant or have questions or flat out don't want to receive the COVID vaccine, tell me what's your approach in terms of how to connect with them.
My approach is really to try and understand their fear, because I really believe that in all cases there's fear behind it, whether it's fear of something as simple as they're scared to get a needle, whether they're scared of, and again, I don't mean this as a put down, but they're scared of, of trying to understand the data, and maybe that their fear of their lack of understanding or their lack of ability to understand. Because, I mean, let's face it, even people who go into medicine, go into science, we learn a way to take apart research and to critique it, to know what's good research versus bad research. Mm-hmm. If you're an everyday person trying to really read stuff like that, that's got to be overwhelming. So, I mean, there's got to be a fear on that end. There's got to be, certainly there's people that fear and have a mistrust of, the government being involved in this, and when it comes to mandates. So to me, there's always some level of fear, and I try to understand that.
And in general, when you try to connect with them, tell us a success story. Has there been a case where someone initially was hesitant to receive the vaccine and you successfully connected with them and then they changed their mind? Tell us a success story.
I think the success stories that I've seen kind of have a common thread, and that is I try not to ask the question about vaccines from a viewpoint of, I'm very pro-vaccine. I try to simply enter into the conversation with, just asking if they have any questions about the vaccine, as opposed to coming across and saying, why aren't you vaccinated? Or how come you haven't gotten the vaccine yet? That comes off as very challenging and very, imposing to a lot of people. Even if that's not your intent, a lot of people will take it that way. So I try and approach it from, what questions do you have about it that I can answer for you? And I find that if I approach it from that point of view, and I've seen it happen where, I have answered their questions, and then that light bulb kind of goes off, and you can see it. You can see that light bulb go off, and I've gotten a lot more people to either consider or flat out get the vaccine from approaching it that way, as opposed to coming from a more challenging standpoint of why aren't they getting it.
So I think an underlying message of your piece is a reflection of our broader society. We're all tribal, right? It's either for or against, and everything is so divisive and polarized. And I think that goes not only with vaccines, but pretty much any topic that you read in the newspaper or you read on Facebook and social media. Now, from a broader messaging standpoint, you talk about connecting with people who don't necessarily agree with you. You talk about not talking down to them. Now, what are some ways that we can do that on social media or podcasts or mainstream media? What are some ways that we can connect with people who don't necessarily share our worldview?
I may give away, something when I make this next statement, but I agree with it 100%. I think we need to check our biases and our personal feelings at the door. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really because we all have bias, we all have personal feelings, but if we let them run what we're doing, whether it be a podcast, whether it be a patient interaction, face to face, I think that's what kind of creates the conflict. And I think we need to, we need to realize that, also need to realize that at the end of the day, no matter if we pose the best argument in the most respectful way, at the end of the day, a patient's still going to do what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And this is regardless of whether we're talking about the COVID vaccine, smoking cessation, we have to let go and understand that, our job is to present to them what the evidence shows, inform them, make sure that they are informed. At the end of the day, they're still going to make their own decision. And that's not in our control. And if we start thinking it is within our control, and that's kind of one of those biases that I'm talking about, we start thinking it is in our control, that, we can tell patients what to do, then that's just going to lead to, disaster, I think.
So, what are some techniques that you use to check your bias at the door? Because I think that's very good advice. We have to be less judgmental of people who don't necessarily agree with us. And I think that's really one of the key ways that we could connect with them. So, what are some ways that we could check our biases? Is it just simply taking a deep breath? What are some ways that you do that?
It's funny you say I do the deep breath a lot, particularly sometimes because sometimes you're still broadsided by it. I remember one particular instance where I simply asked the patient if they had, if they had been, because it wasn't in the record where I could see it. And I just simply asked, I said, have you gotten the vaccine? And without, like, before I got to the end of vaccine, the patient just exploded on me, and he's just like, he's like, no, I'm not getting the vaccine. You can't talk me into getting the vaccine. And I was one of those things where I had to like take that deep breath and say, okay, what's going on here, because something triggered this guy. And I took the deep breath and I kind of backed up and said, listen, I'm not asking you to get the vaccine. I'm just asking you if you've had it, yes or no. And I think it's kind of, sometimes it's just a matter of just calming yourself down, taking that deep breath, and sometimes just starting from scratch.
We're talking to Kenneth Schwach. He is a physician assistant. He wrote the Kevin MD article, A Milligram of Understanding for Anti-Vaxxers. Kenneth, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I think at the end of the day is, we have to check our bias and our personal feelings at the door. I think it really just comes down to that. If we walk into a situation, with a full head of steam of, I know the evidence, I'm right. And we do. I mean, obviously, we read the evidence, we read the articles. It's not a question of whether or not we do understand it, but if we approach a patient interaction with that authority that, I'm the end all be all of this, and if and they need to listen to me, then it's going to be a rough road. It's just going to be a rough road. And I think we need to just understand that patients have fears. Sometimes they're justified. I mean, certainly, for a patient to ask, be concerned about the side effect profile, that's a reasonable question. More patients should be asking about that, no matter what we're prescribing them, whether it be we're recommending the COVID vaccine or we're prescribing them an antihypertensive. Patients should be asking questions about, side effects, and we shouldn't be getting upset about that. So at the end, like I said, at the end of the day, we need to kind of come down, I guess, for lack of better, a little bit more to their level, understand that they have fears that they might not be able to verbalize themselves. Sometimes that's part of what we have to, dig into and figure out.
Kenneth, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.